So, welcome to Children's Coat Heritage Centre once again for our annual day of lectures and papers and general interest in George Eliot. Just a few housekeeping events before I ask Elaine to do the more formal introduction to Pamela. The housekeeping events are that the fire exits are either through the door just the other side here, into the library and out into the playground, the side playground, and the gate is open so we can all congregate on the raised car park there, should that be necessary. The second fire exit is through the door you came in, and the third one is through the kitchen. So hopefully that will be all okay. Toilets are functioning properly. We have been having some problems. It's not the sort of thing one wants to announce at an event like this at the start, but the basic problem is that the kitchen is sinking and the drain pipes have sunk with it, so that the drain away to the sewage outlet is not as steep as it was.
Too much information. Too much information, absolutely.
I won't bore you with the details that our resident plumber delights in telling me about, but hopefully all will be there, all will be well there. We have, it's sometimes a temptation if the weather is good for people sort of to decant and go out into the playground at lunchtime. That's all right, but please do not take any of our new chairs. We don't want any of our new chairs out into the playground. The reason being that they cost us £6,500 and we don't want to run the risk of any of them being damaged. However, should you still wish to go outside, and the weather forecast for the rest of the day is gradual deterioration, but should you wish to get some fresh air, there are some of our old chairs that are out there, and please feel free to sit on those. At the moment, from now till 12 o'clock, the Nuneaton Learning Centre have the Strether room and the school room, and they've squashed all their pupils into that smaller space for our benefit. But they will be off the premises by 12 o'clock, and then the buffet lunch will be brought in. And if you wish to have a look around the rest of the building, in the Strether room there's a lovely exhibition of local paintings for the main part, local paintings by a local artist, Mick Shepperson. And you might want to have a look at those whilst you're either collecting your buffet lunch or eating it, or just go back and have a look. And the whole of the rest of the Heritage Centre is open as well, of course. I think that covers everything. I hope so. There shouldn't be a fire alarm, but if there is, I suggest you follow Dave, because he's our Chief Fire Officer, and he will show you the appropriate exit.
You see him running,
yes.
Keep up.
Right.
You see you running to be a bear.
So I'm sure we're going to have a really interesting day. It is a bit loaded in the morning. For logistical reasons, we needed to have two speakers this morning. John's this afternoon is a little bit shorter, but it might not be, because we'll be fascinated by what he has to say. And then the readings at the end are quite a bit shorter, because we think that we've all had quite a lot really by then, and we could do with a bit more relaxation. But hopefully there'll be time after that for some general discussion about this amazing novel, really, Daniel Deronda. It's quite extraordinary. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Elaine, who will explain how she knows Pamela, and she will introduce us to us. Welcome, Viv.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. I'm extremely delighted to welcome Dr. Pamela Mason here today. Just like George Eliot, Pamela and I are local girls. We both attended Nuneaton High School for girls, but Pamela was in the year above me. So, and vice head girl, so obviously I've always looked up to her. Even more so since she went on to become an internationally respected Shakespeare scholar. and we both had the opportunity to study Middlemarch at school. But today, Pamela's going to give us her thoughts on Daniel Deronda.
Thank you very much, Elaine. Yes. Yes, and what Elaine has just said has anticipated a little bit, so I've had a little bit at the beginning to before I get on to Daniel Deronda. And I've written here, and I can reinforce this. I'm absolutely delighted to have been invited to speak at this prestigious event because, as Elaine has said, primarily my focus, both in research and in teaching, has been Shakespeare. But I have spread my wings, and now I'm very eclectic in what I look at and research and talk about. I don't talk about teaching really anymore. I look at it more as sharing thoughts and enthusiasms. And yesterday I was doing that, sharing thoughts about 3 short stories of Alice Munro. So, and the week before that was Love Labour's Lost and Merchant of Venice. And I'm going on to Coleridge. So I've got quite a lot going on, but I'm excited. And as Elaine has said, I was brought up in the Leeton. I attended what was then the Leeton High School for Girls, prestigious grammar school, and it is my memory that it was impressed on us all at the school, the importance of George Eliot to Nuneaton. And we read The Mill on the Floss in my second year and Silas Marner the following year. But as Elaine mentioned, I studied Middlemarch at A-level and was and increasingly over the years, I'm proud to have done that because I've heard so many teachers say to me now, oh, you'd never do that now, it's far too long. Well, we did it and we really, really enjoyed it. And that's really where I think my love and admiration for her work stemmed from. And my other link with her, which I don't think I've shared with anyone, certainly not with Elaine until today, I was, in the first year at the high school, I was auditioned by the BBC to play a young Mary Ann Evans in a BBC documentary that was being made. And I heard the man say to the teacher, when I'd done my little bit and was going out, oh, she's plain enough to play the part. But she looks too old. So, I don't know. But there you are. Anyway, without more ado, to Daniel Deronda. As I'm sure you all know, the novel was first published in 8 instalments from February to September 1876. And it was the last novel that George Eliot completed, and the only one set in the Victorian society of her day. And there are, of course, 2 strong narrative strands. One, the story of Gwendolen, which has been called one of the masterpieces of English fiction, while the other, which is concerned with Daniel Deronda, has been described as flat and unconvincing. Now, I used to have a degree of sympathy with this division, but perhaps now I'm older and possibly a little bit wiser, I feel more able to appreciate the ways in which these 2 strands complement each other and intersect, not just structurally, but thematically. At the outset, I was obviously much more interested in Gwendolen, but in the process of working on the novel, particularly in recent months, I've become more and more convinced of this novel's unity of purpose and how it is in fact all the women who contribute to our understanding and appreciation of the centrality of Daniel himself and what he represents. Now, in what I'm going to now talk to you about, I shall follow the chronology of the novel, not only simply to respect the narrative, but also because I do believe that the growth and development of the characters is at the core of any reader's understanding of the shaping and outcome of events, and of course, crucially, the conclusion. Now, the novel has been adapted for film 3 times, once as a silent feature in 1921, and twice for television, once in 1970, and then in 2002. Now, it's only the 2002 version which is available, and it is still available. I had sort of thought I might show you some little extracts. My Apple computer has defeated me and the technology, so I wonder, but I do very, very, very strongly recommend this adaptation. And if you don't know it, then it is available. You can even do that old-fashioned thing and buy a DVD and enjoy really some brilliant casting and some well-shaping of it. I really do think it's very good. Anyway, to the novel. 70 chapters divided into 8 books. Now, I've always felt that the opening of this novel is absolutely brilliant. Following a brief reflection on the narrative structure, George Eliot claims our attention with a question about a lady. Was she beautiful or not beautiful? And what was the secret of form or expression which gave the dynamic quality to her glance? Was the good or the evil genius dominant in those beams? Probably the evil. Else, why was the effect of that unrest rather than of disturbed charm? Why was the wish to look again felt as coercion and not as a longing in which the whole being consents? So we are drawn in by that. And before she's named, we're told that she who raised these questions in Daniel Deronda's mind was occupied in gambling, a lady deeply engaged in the roulette table. So we, as a reader, are watching Daniel, watching the lady who we will learn, and not for a few pages, is Gwendolyn Harley. They will not get to know each other for quite a while, but that axis of interest is established here. They are aware of each other, and his gaze influences her playing. And there is symbolism in the fact that she is winning until they see each other, and then she loses and becomes increasingly reckless. Faites vos jeux, mesdames et messieurs, said the automatic voice of destiny. And Gwendolyn's arm was stretched to deposit her last poor heap of Napoleons. Le jeu n'est pas plus, says destiny. And in 5 seconds, Gwendolyn turned from the table, but turned resolutely with her face towards Deronda and looked at him. There was a smile of irony in his eyes as their glances met. Other people have noticed Gwendolyn. Why would they not? I mean, a striking figure. Much observed by the seating groups. A striking girl. Yes, she's got herself up as a sort of serpent now, all green and silver, and winds her neck about a little more than usual. You like a nez retroussé then, and long narrow eyes, when they go with such an ensemble. The ensemble du serpent, if you will. Woman was tempted by a serpent, why not man? Brilliant in setting that up. And of course the man particularly that has been looking at her, she inquires about him, she learns his name, he's an Englishman, he's reported to be closely associated with the baronet, Sir Hugo Mallinger, the promise to introduce her, but the chapter ends. Gwendolyn did not make Deronda's acquaintance on this occasion. Mr. Vanderlip did not succeed in bringing him up to her that evening, and when she re-entered her own room, she found a letter recalling her home. So quite a brilliant, brilliant opening, which of course, this is the opening of the novel, but the novel doesn't actually begin at the beginning. This is a beginning, but not the beginning. George Eliot choosing to foreground, to give us right at the beginning that first encounter between Daniel Deronda and Gwendolyn. So she then gets this letter from her mother, beginning the second chapter, a dreadful calamity has befallen us all, and we are totally ruined. Now, an expectation of any reader might be, here is a girl out gambling recklessly, and her mother sends this desperate letter to her. And you would think that the daughter would be concerned about her mother. There was no inward exclamation of poor mama, Her mama had never seemed to get much enjoyment out of life, and if Gwendolyn had been at this moment disposed to feel pity, she would have bestowed it on herself. For was she not naturally and rightfully the chief object of her mama's anxiety too? This first book is called The Spoiled Child, and it's absolutely clear. She continues to think about returning to gamble more. Pride prevents her from telling her companions the truth about the family financial crisis. She just says that her mother requires her at home, and she decides to leave quickly. But even in this beginning of her troubles, while for lack of anything else to do, she sat gazing at her image in the growing light. Her beautiful lips curled into a more and more decided smile, till as she took off her hat, leant forward and kissed the cold glass which had looked so warm. How could she believe in sorrow? She loves herself. She absolutely does. However, she has got a practical problem. She's lost all her money gambling, and she needs money, so she pawns a necklace. A necklace with 3 turquoises. It had been part of a chain, once her father's. That little detail she had never known her father. But before she leaves, a small packet from Miss Harthers is delivered. Something she never quite knew what revealed to her before she opened the packet that it contained the necklace she just parted with. And there's a little note in it. A stranger who has found Miss Harthers' necklace returns it to her with the hope that she will not again risk the loss of it. And of course, this is almost theatrically like this first necklace, and not just this necklace, but as you know the novel, another necklace is going to be very important in the novel, but this is placed here particularly. And of course, it is a link, Gwendolyn links back to her father, but it also provides an important link here with Daniel. She works out. It was Deronda, yeah? And no one, she said, she feels, had ever before dared to treat her with irony and contempt. Anyway, we then move on to find out about events before the family were at Offendene, and this gives us an insight into the nature of the past, which had produced this remarkable woman. It was only a year before her recall from Lebrun that Offendene had been chosen as her mama's house. So you've got, and the reason, because of its nearness to Pennycock Rectory, and Mrs. Davenant, Gwendolyn, and her 4 half-sisters. That is important, I think, because although she's got these other sisters, they're only half-sisters, and she reigns supreme in the family. She doesn't have, not is so unsentimental. It isn't one big lovely family of girls. I am one of 6 girls, all right? So I kind of know something about that. Anyway, she keeps herself apart from them. And they moved into this house. This move made life more agreeable. Gwendolyn didn't like her stepfather, and she'd asked her mother, "Why did you marry again, Mama?" Now, that in itself is not an unreasonable question for a daughter to ask a mother, I think. However, the next sentence is not reasonable. It would have been nicer if you had not. Mrs. Davenant coloured deeply, and straight away, shutting up the memorial, she said with a violence quite unusual in her, "You have no feeling, child. I feel for her mother a lot. I really do." Yeah? However, as Georgette goes on to explain, having always been the pet and pride of the household, waited on by mother, sisters, governess and maids, as if she had been a princess in exile, this is what has shaped this spoiled child. And she does have a little bit of a conversation here with her mother about marriage, which is important. Gwendolyn says, "What's the use of my being charming if it's to end in my being dull and not minding anything? Is that what marriage always comes to, and her mother says, no child, certainly not. Marriage is the only happy state for a woman, as I trust you will prove. I will not put up with it if it's not a happy state. I'm determined to be happy. I've made up my mind not to let other people interfere with me as they have done. And her selfishness is explicit. Remember that little detail about her mother having asked her to give one of her half-sisters, Alice, lessons? I've done it because you asked me, but I don't see why I should. The hardship is for me to have to waste my time on her, Alice. She's more interested in, not really interested in her sisters, not really interested in her mother, but she is interested in her uncle. At present, it was a matter of extreme interest to her that she was to have the near countenance of a dignified male relative, and that the family life would cease to be entirely, insipidly feminine. So she's already got this interest, and that is encouraged in a way by her uncle, because he commends Gwendolen. He has pride and admiration towards her, and says about his own daughter that Gwendolen has outgrown Anna, but when he looked at his own daughter, he saw her inferiority. Gwendolen was aware of the inferiority of her cousin, and she kissed her cousin. That's all right then, because she's not going to be any rival. But she's much more interested in Anna's brothers, particularly Rex, and she wants to have a horse. It's all about her, yeah? She wants to have a horse. And when archery is mentioned, she says, I should like it of all things. There's nothing I enjoy more than taking aim and hitting. She ended with a pretty nod and smile. And her uncle says, our Anna, poor child, is too short-sighted for archery. Poor Anna, she's not much going for her here, has she? Anyway, but we also learn here about society, about two other women who are going to be important. Miss Arrowpoint, a delightful girl, and her mother, Mrs. Arrowpoint, is peculiar, but well-meaning. Okay? So, Gwendolen is determined to have a horse. They can't afford it, but she will have her way. And this is an early evidence of what shapes in Gwendolen a belief that she can get her way, particularly by manipulating men. So she puts pressure on her uncle, who gives in to her. His wife, poor dear, castigates her husband for this, because they can't really afford it, but he does. And so it's something which contributes to Gwendolen's sense of being able to control others and get her way. And his wife raises her anxiety lest their sons fall in love with Gwendolen. Her husband assures her there will be no danger. Wrong, absolutely wrong. But her uncle is sure that Gwendolen is going to make a brilliant marriage. And that view, of course, is shared by her. She recognises the importance of marriage, but to become a wife and wear all the domestic fetters of that condition was on the whole a vexatious necessity. And her view of matrimony had inclined her to think it's a rather dreary state in which a woman could not do what she liked, had more children than were desirable, was consequently dull, and became irrevocably immersed in humdrum. But marriage was social promotion, and that is significant for Gwendolen. The opening movement here, a huge amount of time is invested then in Gwendolen, where we're absolutely clear that her confidence lay chiefly in herself. We do, early on, meet, of course, the Arrowpoints and Herr Klezmer and his criticism of her singing, and that is going to be a trope which will go through the novel. both in terms of women singing and music, and particularly his judgment. She's also, Gwendolyn is rude to Mr. Arrowpoint. She is fairly insufferable. It's incredible how much we kind of like her, because she is fairly terrible in the way she's presented at the beginning. And of course we do hear about Grandcourt quite early on. He's not there at the beginning, but he does arrive. It's once we get into book 2, Meeting Streams, which gives us the first conversation between Grandcourt and Gwendolyn. And it's significant that it comes after her first archery competition. And it's as if George Eliot uses here a very interesting technique in terms of the dialogue. She's not a writer who uses loads and loads of dialogue, but this is a fascinating example of where she offers bracketed thoughts of Gwendolyn after she's spoken. So when Grandcourt has said, "I used to think archery was a great bore," Gwendolyn says, "Are you converted today?" And then George Eliot writes, in brackets, pause, during which she imagined various degrees and modes of opinion about herself that might be entertained by Grandcourt. And then he says, "When I saw you shooting," and so on. Generally, he says, you see people missing, so he's not interested. And she says, "I suppose you're a first-rate shot with a rifle." Pause, again, in brackets, during which Gwendolyn, having taken a rapid observation of Grandcourt, made a brief graphic description of him to an indefinite hearer. So in other words, quick kind of work out the description of him. "I've left off shooting," he says. And she says, "But you have not left off hunting." Again, pause. Wherein Gwendolyn recalled what she'd heard about Grandcourt's position and decided that he was the most aristocratic-looking man she'd ever seen. His response, "One must do something," which is brilliant, I think, absolutely something. Anyway, Grandcourt very quickly decides that he wants to marry Gwendolyn. Seeing her every day for a fortnight, lots of riding, her mother has an uneasy foreboding. When he steers Gwendolyn to a grassy knoll, she's pleased and yet afraid. Marrying him seemed more attractive. Now, it's not just that we as the readers are privy to his conversations with Lush. There are certainly aspects of Grandcourt that should prompt concern, but Gwendolyn's reasoning is limited, while her confidence in her own ability is unlimited. The less he had of particular taste or desires, the more freedom his wife was likely to have in following hers. Gwendolyn conceived that after marriage, she would most probably be able to manage him thoroughly. And George Eliot injects a rare note of humour in reporting Gwendolyn's reasoning. Grandcourt, after all, was formidable, a handsome lizard of a hitherto unknown species, not of the lively, darting kind, but Gwendolyn knew hardly anything about lizards. And ignorance gives one a large range of probabilities. I don't think if you took that sentence out of context and posted it and said to people, "What writer do you think?" And I said the writer who wrote that, I do not think they would think George Eliot, and that makes it absolutely brilliant, I think. There is real importance, I think, in the Catherine-Klezmer relationship. Catherine initially, obviously, provides a foil to Gwendolyn, not only in her challenge to Gwendolyn's assumption that beauty outweighs all other qualities, but also in her musical talent. And in the business of marriage, Catherine will demonstrate admirable strength of character, courage, and emotional maturity. This relationship, this marriage for Catherine, is of course a transgressive relationship in the view of the society, but it will later be accepted. And it can provide, does provide, I think, in the novel, a template for the Hans Mira later hope. Yeah? Now, Lush, this figure, interesting figure, he doesn't, of course, think that the marriage between, the prospect of a marriage between Grandcourt and Gwendolen is good for either of them, and he does seek to wreck the progress of the relationship, though his intervention is only made clear later. And of course you have that letter that is handed to Gwendolen. Brilliant, brilliant letter, which is the first voice, as it were, of this another fascinating woman in this novel. If Miss Harworth is in doubt whether she should accept Mr. Grandcourt, let her break from her party after they have passed the Whispering Stones and return to that spot. She will then hear something to decide her, but she can only hear it by keeping this letter a strict secret from everyone. If she does not act according to this letter, she will repent, as the woman who writes it has repented. The secrecy, Miss Harworth will feel herself bound in honour to guard. And that line, she will repent as the woman who writes it has repented, sets up a parallel between these two women. Before this woman is named, before we know anything really about her, certainly before Gwendolen is met her, but that sense of a parallel between them. And of course, she does meet this woman. And when you do get the chance to see this adaptation, this is brilliantly done. She is brilliantly played. And of course, that encounter does get through to Gwendolen and precipitates her departure. And we're told, she tells Gwendolen tells her mother, I wish to go away. And later in that chapter, Mr. Grandcourt called that day off indeed, but nobody was at home. And this is, of course, what leads Gwendolen to the roulette wheel. So the narrative is quite brilliantly shaped in that way. Okay. And while Gwendolen, having been at the roulette wheel, is being pulled back to England, Grandcourt was travelling to find her. And we are told, actually, that her running away has had some piquancy for him. He quite likes it. Well, he likes hunting, and it's the chase, isn't it? Yeah? And of course, in another piece of narrative connection, Grandcourt, looking for Gwendolen, meets his uncle, Sir Hugo Mallinger, and his family, including Daniel Deronda. Now, the family link ties these protagonists firmly together. But Grandcourt comments here that the two men, Grandcourt and Daniel, George Eliot comments here that the two men, Grandcourt and Daniel, have a peculiar relation, depending on circumstances, yet to be made known. Remember, someone like George Eliot writing without a computer, without cut and paste, without and all that, but this careful plotting drops that detail in there. Because, of course, it's because Sir Hugo has no sons, Grandcourt is the presumptive heir to the Mallinger estate. Yeah? And we have in Daniel, then, a man who has been told he's an orphan, but is rumoured to be the illegitimate son of a titled man who has only daughters, and so he's going to lose land to his nephew. Daniel is a man uncertain about who he is. Well, those details are at the beginning. But he is being brought up as an English gentleman, Eton and Cambridge, and with a future career as barrister, writer, politician. And he's doing very well at Cambridge until his studies are interrupted when he develops a brotherly anxiety. That's an interesting phrase. He hasn't got a brother. We didn't know he'd got a brother yet. But he develops a brotherly anxiety about Hans Mary, who loses his sight. Daniel gives priority to caring for him, neglects his own mathematics study, asks Sir Hugo if he can leave Cambridge. And Hans helps him by writing to explain to Sir Hugo about Daniel's selflessness, in contrast to how much we've had in this first movement of selfishness, Daniel's selflessness. Daniel then goes abroad, but returns after a year with increased indecision about who he is and where he's going. Rowing on the river, singing the gondolier's aria from Otello, and that is not irrelevant. He can sing And he does sing, and again, it's a brilliant bit in the film, because he does do that. They show this absolutely, and he does that. And of course, it also establishes he's got a voice, he can sing, and this is such an important motif in the novel. And it's this incredible, wonderful episode of him seeing this girl on the bank and then stepping in through, almost like Ophelia, like I was thinking, as that possibility. But he rescues her. This episode marks the conclusion to Book 2. The clear sense of this narrative strand has a powerful spiritual importance. Mira lifted her eyes to his and said with reverential fervour, "The God of our fathers bless you and deliver you from all evil as you have delivered me. I did not believe there was any man so good. None before have thought me worthy of the best. You found me poor and miserable, yet you have given me the best." So within that movement of the first two books, you have contrasted utter confidence and selfishness and this wonderful, vulnerable figure on the point of absolute despair, rescued by Daniel and praising his essential goodness. And when we go to the next book, it's called Maidens Choosing. Well, the maidens that we've met so far are primarily, of course, Gwendolen and Mira, but don't forget Catherine Arrowpoint. Now, this book begins with a qualified use of the word romantic to describe Deronda, but he has a fervour which made him easily find poetry and romance in everyday life. Before visiting Mira, as promised, because when he's taken her to Mrs. Mayrick, to Hans's mother, he says he's going to visit, but before he goes to visit her, we are given insight into his thinking about Mira being Jewish. George Eliot directly here, so early on, engages with the widespread unease and prejudice through Daniel's acknowledgement of the extent to which he too has shared it. But we're also allowed to see how meeting Mira has begun to complicate these feelings. And this process will continue not only as he gets to know her more, but also as he journeys further, both literally and intellectually, into the Jewish world. As he gets to know her story, they will also feel an affinity in their situations. So we've had this important movement before we move back to Gwendolen and her return home. And she can't envisage living in poverty. What is the good of living in the midst of hardships, ugliness, and humiliation? Think of the effect of this on the reader, given, juxtaposed as it is, with our first encounter with Mira. Yeah? Gwendolyn's determined, she's not going to submit. She hates men who brought the situation about. She hates Grandcourt at this point for being what had hindered her from marrying him. Right? You work it out. She hates him now because of what she found out about her, and that has stopped her marrying him. But she does have what George Eliot calls one of her best moments responding to her mother's distress. And she tells her mother, "I will do something, things will come right." But, and it's a huge but for Gwendolen, the prospect of Sawyer's Cottage appalls her. Her mother reminds her, though, we have nothing. Gwendolen is going to be a governess. She says she'd rather emigrate than be a governess. Interesting that. She'll sell all her ornaments. She's going to consult Klezmer about using her musical talent. And she has such confidence in that she'll be able to do that. She writes to him. Now, when that letter arrives at Herr Klezmer, we're told he delays a planned departure. Now, George Eliot has alerted the reader so we understand the subtext here. The Arrowpoint hour of astonishment was come. When there is a passion between an heiress and a proud, independent, spirited man, it's difficult for them to come to an understanding. That is the first detail that we have really about that. That is put there. But anyway, Klesmer does have this conversation then. He has a conversation with Catherine about leaving, and it is tense. And Catherine's emotional state is expressed. She was tearing a piece of paper into minute morsels, as if a task of utmost multiplication imposed by a cruel fairy, as she asked him about his motivation for leaving. And this is a very good bit of dialogue, I think. You can conceive no motive, said Klesmer, folding his arms, none that seems in the least probable. Then I shall tell you. It is because you are to me the chief woman in the world, the throned lady whose colours I carry between my heart and my armour. Say that to you, yeah? Wonderful. Her hands trembled, I bet they did. She couldn't carry on tearing the paper. And he says, I'll go and pack, I'll make my excuses to Mrs. Arrowpoint. He got up, he walked towards the door, and Catherine, suddenly making a desperate effort, you must take this heap of manuscript. She had risen to fetch the heap from another table. He came back, and they had the length of the folio sheets between them. And she says to him, why should I not marry the man who loves me if I love him? Brilliant, brilliant, direct. And the sheets of music between them, I mean, it's brilliantly crafted, it's naturalistic, but of course it's symbolic, yeah? And then, George Eliot tells her, to her, the effort was something like the leap of a woman from the deck into the lifeboat. And there's a little bit of an academic thing, a little bit about mirror, yeah? But amazing. And he says to her, initially, I am not worth what you would have to encounter. I will not accept the sacrifice. It would be thought a misalliance for you, and I should be liable to the worst accusations. And she says, such strength here. Is it the accusations you are afraid of? I'm afraid of nothing, but that we should miss the passing of our lives together. The decisive word had been spoken by Catherine, by a woman here. There was no doubt concerning the end willed by each. There only remained the way of arriving at it, and Catherine, determined to take it straight as possible, she went to her father and mother in the library and told them that she had promised to marry Klesmer. Done. Right? Her parents are appalled. She must be mad. They insist on her duty. She must marry a gentleman. They condemn Klesmer, a gypsy, a Jew, a mere bubble of the earth. She insists on marrying the man she loves. Her father says, we must do as other people. Catherine, though, is determined. Her parents disinherit her. All done so strongly, so decisively. There. But Klesmer does agree to visit Gwendolen. So these two women are now being juxtaposed. And she really felt clever enough for anything. This is Tori arrived, so, you know, she's not worried. She tells her mirror, back to that, I feel beautiful. And she wants to be an actress, or better, she thinks she could probably make more money if she was a singer. She'll bear hardship at first, but Klesmer's incisive, direct, even brutal judgment makes her turn pink and pale. She believes his judgment is fallible and biased, but he is clear. You will hardly achieve more than mediocrity. That's it. He then tells her of his engagement, and he suggests that Catherine could actually be her patroness. But to Gwendolen, that suggestion is repulsive. He leaves, and she had never in her life been more miserable. And the next chapter sees her struggling to accept her situation. She's going to have to be a governess. There seems to be no other alternative. It's very interesting that she's completely disconcerted when she's told that the bishop's wife, she's going to go and be a governess with the bishop's family, but the bishop's wife is insisting on interviewing her. And she just thinks, why? What? You know, I'm not going to do any of that. Why should I be interviewed? She gives her ornaments to her mother to sell, but she can't give away the necklace, still wrapped in the handkerchief with the corner torn off, and that prompts her return to thoughts about Deronda. where she doesn't really, she's got, well, Eliot tells us, she had a confused state of emotion about Deronda. Was it wounded pride and resentment, or a certain awe and exceptional trust? It was something vague and yet mastering which impelled her to this action about the necklace. And then this wonderful, wonderful line, which is one of those that I've got on a little card that I keep. There is a great deal of unmapped country within us, which would have to be taken into account in an explanation of our gusts and storms. Unmapped country within us, yeah? Anyway, the final two chapters of this book, Maiden's Choosing, show Grandcourt writing to ask to see Gwendolen and see her alone, and for Gwendolen, a moment of choice was come. Yet was it triumph she felt most, or terror? He visits and proposes. The final words of Book 3 are Gwendolen telling her mother that everything is to be as I like it. The narrative continues straight on in Book 4. Gwendolen gets her choice, which opens by reporting the important news of her engagement being conveyed to the rectory. Anna reflects on how she'd been wondering whether Gwendolen's affections might have softened towards her brother. Gwendolen expresses her dislike of Lush, and Grandcourt appears to agree to dismiss him. But of course, we know he's just going to tell him to advise him to lie low. Yeah? And this is early evidence to the reader of Grandcourt's control in the relationship, despite Gwendolen continuing to believe she has the power. But it's also very important, I think, to recognise how little Gwendolen understands marriage. And although, of course, it's not in any way directly stated, there is absolutely no doubt that Gwendolen has no idea of her own sexuality or sensuality. She has, so that aspect of marriage is not something that I think she has ever engaged with. One could be critical of her mother, except that we have seen her mother, I think we would use that phrase, doing her best with Gwendolen, and the way her mother is very much in awe of Gwendolen, and the way in which Gwendolen dominates. And of course her mother turns to Gwendolen a great deal, and in fairness to Gwendolen, one of the overriding reasons, justifications for agreeing to marry Grandcourt, despite, of course, the whole Lydia thing, is for her mother. Yeah? For the financial security that this gives to her mother. And in the television version, she opens this letter from Grandcourt after she's agreed to him, and out falls a cheque. That is quite a good moment in the dramatisation, absolutely to make that point, I think. Anyway, Daniel agrees to go to Diplo on Sir Hugo's behalf. Never underestimate how skillfully this novel is constructed to tie things together. So he's going on to Hugo's behalf to negotiate its sale, and this then provides an opportunity for Gwendolen to talk to Daniel. She recounts how she started to lose at roulette as soon as he started looking at her. Her mother, in this conversation here, shares speculation about Daniel being Sir Hugo's son, passing as his ward, and his mother having been a foreigner of high rank, a dark-eyed, beautiful woman. But the conversation that Gwendolen has with her mother later that evening is further evidence of huge naivety in her. She asks her mother, do men generally have children before they are married? And she also asks, does Lady Mallinger know? Her mother's reply, which is it helps us further to understand her mother. Her mother's reply is that Lady Mallinger knows enough to satisfy her. Daniel lives with them. she cites that as evidence of an acceptance, and she's right, yeah? And Gwendolyn then moves on to wonder if Daniel feels angry at his father. And she states, and this is where she's seeking to kind of explore her own feelings, but also establish a link between herself and Daniel. She says, children have a right to be angry with their parents. And this prompts her to think of her own anger months ago at her mother's remarriage, and that now seems to make her own marriage a forbidden thing. And in this meeting, in this visit of Daniel, she does engineer an opportunity to talk to him. She really angers her husband. Do you remember, it's that moment they're out riding, and she waves her whip at him. He does not like that, and she suffers for it later. But she manufactures this opportunity to talk to him alone, and she asks him about his judgment of her gambling. Do you think it was wrong for me to gamble because I'm a woman? And he says, well, not altogether. I regretted it the more because you're a woman, but he thinks it would be better for men not to gamble. And his argument, and this is so important, I think, in the kind of morality of the novel, he goes on to say, there are enough inevitable turns of fortune which force us to see that our gain is another loss. That is one of the ugly aspects of life. One would like to reduce it as much as one could. So this idea that you shouldn't seek to gain from someone else's loss is really important. And a recognition, this recognition comes from Gwendolyn at this point about the kind of resonance of that. So she seeks to kind of challenge it. She says, things are so in spite of us, we can't always help it that our gain is another's loss. And Daniel is, I mean, he's kind of sympathetic to her. He says clearly, but because of that, we should help it where we can. So, the importance then of loss and gain. Think about her turquoise necklace, and we will then, and put the turquoise necklace against the Grand Court diamonds. She will gain a husband. Lydia loses. Her marriage is her mother's gain, and will be Gwendolyn's loss. So there's lots of ways in which structurally we can see that. Grand Court then visits Lydia, and he has two reasons to go and see her. To tell her that he's marrying Gwendolyn, and to reclaim his diamonds. She defies him by insisting on delivering the diamonds herself. And the last sentence of this encounter, the effect that clung and gnawed within Grand Court was a sense of imperfect mastery. And that sensing him with Lydia absolutely prepares us for how he will actually be with Gwendolyn. Because the next chapter opens on the morning of Gwendolyn's wedding with sad faces of her mother and Anna. Now, Gwendolyn has the brilliancy of strong excitement. It's amidst the gratification of that ambitious vanity and desire for luxury within her, which it would take a great deal of slow poisoning to kill. Now, the word that is very much associated with the whole business of the diamond necklace is venom. And there's quite a lot in the language of the novel, and here this idea of you'll take on a great deal of, she's going to suffer a great deal of slow poisoning, yeah? And this glowing effect makes her able to suppress any guilt about Lydia or any thoughts about Daniel despising her decision. No details are given of the wedding, but the following paragraph is her mother helping her change her wedding dress and put on her travelling outfit. This is a very, very moving bit in the dramatisation. Gwendolyn urges her mother to be happy, as her daughter will be enjoying everything glorious, splendid houses and horses and diamonds. I shall have diamonds. But when she parts from her mother, we see her vulnerability. Her mother says, my sweet child, I shall not be jealous if you love your husband better, and he will expect to be first. Gwendolen thrust out her lips and chin with a pretty grimace, saying, rather a ridiculous expectation, "However, I don't mean to treat him ill, unless he deserves it." Then the two fell into a clinging embrace. So you've got that kind of strident, confident Gwendolen. But then they embrace each other, and Gwendolen could not hinder a rising sob when she said, "I wish you were going with me, Mama." And I think that is one of the most moving moments for Gwendolen. And I think that also, unspoken sob, but this is a fear, this is a childlike element. I think perhaps she is just realising something of the reality, particularly as this is an undressing and dressing moment. This is a kind of a physical moment with her mother. Yeah. Anyway, we learn, of course, that the married couple go off 50 miles to Rylands, and it's clear that it's the same day, it's the wedding day, when she is shown to her den, that's the word that's used, and a packet is delivered. And the parallel with that earlier packet is very clear structurally. But this one contains the diamonds and a letter, and the word venom is used several times. George Eliot tells us, truly here were poisoned gems, and the poison had entered into this poor young creature. Her husband enters. Now that is the end of the chapter, and it's left to, it's like closing the door on the bedroom and so on, yeah? But when you do get a chance to see the filmed extract, it's not the end of the extract. All right, there's a little bit more. Don't worry, we don't see too much, but we see enough to get a good understanding of what's about to happen and the nature of her husband. And we then shift back to Daniel. And when he goes back to see Sir Hugo to report on what he's found out, that Grandcourt Will is interested in selling the property. So Hugo wants him not to flirt. You're always looking tenderly at the women. And it does make Daniel decide to be more on his guard with Mira. Mrs. Mayrick reports on how well Mira is and on her beautiful singing. The family have a discussion about religion. Daniel has regarded Judaism as an eccentric, fossilized form. But for Mira, Judaism was something still throbbing in human lives. And an imaginative stirring, that's George Eliot's phrase, in Daniel, leads him to seeking out books, visiting synagogues and so on. He is asked, what is your parentage, your mother's family? I am an Englishman. Mira is upset when her kind of adoptive family mention that she could convert to become a Christian. I will never separate myself from my mother's people. I will always be a Jewess. Now, Daniel's ventures into the Jewish world have led him to worry about what condition her mother may be in, and he encourages her to delay searching for her mother until after Christmas. And it's when he is doing his searching on her behalf that he meets Mordecai. And he is intrigued by him. And of course that takes us into the book called Mordecai, but we don't immediately engage with him. Remember, we had last seen Gwendolen screaming after receiving the diamonds and the letter from Lydia. Now Daniel has accompanied the Mallingers in a Christmas visit to the Abbey. So it's the 29th of December, he's heard the Grandcourts have arrived, but has yet to see them. He wonders, Daniel wonders, about what change there might be in her manner. The Grandcourts have had a 3-week honeymoon, and there is huge anticipation, not just in all the guests that are there, but in the reader too, to see that, to see her. And what happens when she comes in? She's handsomer in white silk and diamonds. We learn here that the Arrowpoints have reconciled with Catherine, and that she and Klesmer are spending Christmas with the family. And Daniel, when he sees Gwendolen, is surprised by a little hardness and defiance in her. But we get a sense, and he gets a sense, that this is an appearance, yeah? Because he sees an appealing look of sadness in her. She really wants to speak to him. And we then we get an insight into what she calls her miseries. Yes, miseries. This beautiful, healthy young creature with her 22 years and her gratified ambition no longer felt inclined to kiss her fortunate image in the glass. She looked at it with wonder that she could be so miserable. the 7 short weeks which seemed half her life, her husband had gained a mastery over her. Although she had burnt Lydia's letter, the words plague her insistently. I always think it's really, Georgiana very helpfully reprints the letter here to say that going to flick back to find it, so even though she's burnt it, Georgiana gives it to us here. Gwendolyn is aware that in marrying Grandcourt she's broken her word. Her scene with Lydia at the well-named Whispering Stones keeps replaying, and she dreaded that Grandcourt should know of it. And we do here get very clearly expressed, Gwendolyn's yearning, and that is the word that's used for Daniel. I wish he could know everything about me without my telling him. Without the aid of a sacred ceremony or costume, her feelings had turned this man, only a few years older than herself, into a priest. And this is important, I think, in first time really from her yearning, her need, but that, what she identifies there as a role. So the emerging sense here is how structurally both Mira and now Gwendolyn feel a bond with and indeed a need for Daniel. Okay. And Daniel is told about Grandcourt and the details relating to Lydia, and he feels a connection. He thought he saw clearly enough now why Sir Hugo had never dropped any hint of his affair to him, and immediately the image of this Mrs. Glacier became painfully associated with his own hidden birth. That is another strand of connection, not particularly developed, but it is there structurally. There's Daniel's support of Mira, tries to get her some pupils for singing lessons, and when he praises Mira to Gwendolyn, she reacts very strongly to this image of piety. I have no sympathy with women who are always doing right. I don't believe in their great sufferings, which is really harsh, yeah? And she accuses Daniel, and says to him, I think you would despise a woman who's done something that you thought very wrong, and he says that would depend entirely upon her own view of what she had done. And that really is going to be a very important axis between the two of them. You've got then the business of her wanting to wear the turquoise necklace. Remember, she doesn't want to offend her husband, so she wound it thrice round her wrist and made a bracelet out of it. And when Daniel comes to talk to her with her husband, she asks for a glass of water so that she can reach up and reveal the bracelet. It's brilliant. And she directly asks him for advice. Tell me what better I can do. Insistently, we're told. She says again, tell me again, what would you do if you were in my place? And we are told, or Eliot tells us, that her appeal is unspeakably touching to him. And he says, I'd alter my life so as to make any possible amends and keep away from doing any more injury. I can't, she says, I must go on. His heart was full of pity for her. And she insists, you can help me. I will try, but you must help me. And then, the first time of a line which is so important for her and for their relationship, she says, it shall be better with me because I have known you. Yeah, absolutely key. And this is an absolutely crucial section of the novel. It's a long chapter, and it marks a turning point for Gwendolyn in her acknowledgement of her own wrongs, and in reaching out to Daniel, she's recognising him as the person who first intervened in her life to prompt her to think about the life she was leading and the decisions she was making. The necklace, a chain from her father, an object for transaction into cash, initially for more gaming, usurped by Grandcourt's diamonds, which she had stolen from Lydia, then wound, the necklace wound around her wrist, not decorative, more manacle-like, but crucially a means of communicating with Deronda when under constraint from her husband. The use here of these essentially props, as it were, is really, really important. Now, when Daniel returns to his lodgings in London, into which he had generously invited Hans, he discovers, and I think this comes as a surprise to readers, yeah? He discovers that his own relationship with Mira has become complicated by an unexpected rival. Daniel tells Hans, in the way when Hans has revealed his love for, or developed love for Mira, she would not marry a Christian even if she loved him. But we remember Catherine and Klesmer. Hans is insistent and emotional. I love her, I worship her, I won't despair, I mean to deserve her. My dear fellow, you can't do it, said Deronda quickly. So we then have Daniel's turbulent thoughts prompted by Hans' declaration. Because what has happened is it's brought to the surface Daniel's own feelings about Mira. It was undeniable that what had just happened made a new stage in his feeling towards Mira and made him think about his own parentage. And there's ultimately a really poignant sense of Daniel's feeling of isolation without a close friend. Quite simply, he'd always been lent on instead of being invited to lead. Now, that inevitably draws us in to him at this crucial point of his vulnerability. And that then takes us to Mordecai, whose figure had bitten itself into Daniel's mind, and for whom, from Mordecai's point of view, Daniel fulfills Mordecai's yearning for some young ear into which he could pour his mind as a testament. Daniel explicitly is the figure representative of Mordecai's longing. Mordecai is drawn to Daniel, the nameless stranger who came to redeem his reign. Mordecai has a belief that he's going to see him. Klesmer visits Mira, and another structural parallel. Klesmer visiting Gwendolyn to hear her sing. Klesmer visits Mira, so that links again Mira and Gwendolyn. And his immediate response to her singing is a commendation. Let us shake hands, you are a musician. And he invites her to sing for him and ensures Mrs. Mayrick that Mira will make you an income. And Mira cries with happiness. And then you have another parallel, structural parallel, with when Daniel is again rowing on the river and Mordecai sees him from Blackfriars Bridge. I've been waiting for you these 5 years. This sense of destiny, this sense of inevitability, and Mordecai telling him, you will be my life, and Daniel telling him, do you forget what I told you when we first saw each other? Do you remember that I said I was not of your race? It can't be true, Mordecai whispered immediately, with no sign of shock. You are not sure of your own origin. And the end of the chapter, my hope abides in you, I will be faithful, says Deronda, trust me. So let me offer a rebuttal for those who insist this is a broken back novel. I'll totally challenge that by drawing attention to how the book particularly unites the characters not simply through the narrative, but it does that very skillfully, but more powerfully through the theme of questing. At its heart, the characters are searching, both to discover their parentage with Daniel, and in that his heritage, or more simply, find their mother and brother, Mira, but for all, including Gwendolyn, to find out who they are. And by the time we get then to the beginning of chapter 6, Revelations, the opening line directly engages with the reader's feelings. Imagine, says Dr. Eliot, the conflict in a mind like Deronda's, given not only to feel strongly, but to question actively on the evening after the interview with Mordecai. He's aware of the likely response of Sir Hugo, and in voicing that, George Eliot gives a voice to readers who also may share that view. Deronda knew quite accurately the answer Sir Hugo would have given. A consumptive Jew possessed by a fanaticism which obstacles and hastening death intensified, had fixed on Deronda as the antitype of some visionary image, the offspring of wedded hopes and despair, despair of his own life, irrepressible hope in the propagation of his fanatical beliefs. But we are invested in Daniel and will be, I suggest, guided by him. He's inexorably drawn to the Jewish religion and world. His acceptance of Sir Hugo as his father is being challenged, but he's able to rationalise that if he hadn't come across Mira in the river, then he wouldn't have had this interest in Jewishness kindled, and he decides to cherish this uncertainty for the present. It will be just 2 chapters later that Mordecai will reveal that he's Mira's brother. George Eliot anticipates what the reader will now be thinking in the opening of chapter 44. And Gwendolen. She was thinking of Deronda much more than he was thinking of her. She is struggling to effect change. She's trying to get interest in others. She's gathered books for dipping into, all under the exacting eyes of her husband. She's acted well to convey, and she needs a bit of credit for this. She's acted well to convey complete satisfaction to her mother that the reason her mother is being kept at a distance from Grandcourt and her is because of Gwendolen's indifference, rather than the truth, which is the complete veto of her husband on any intimacy with her family. The Grandcourts are in London and they hear Mira sing. And that enables, for the first time, Mira and Gwendolen to come together. And George Eliot directly addresses her readers. Pray excuse Deronda that in this moment he felt a transient renewal of his first repulsion from Gwendolen, as if she and her beauty and her failings were to blame for the undervaluing of Mira as a woman. A little later he repents his harshness, he relented towards poor Gwendolen and her splendour, and his memory went back with some penitence for his momentary hardness over all signs and confessions that she too needed a rescue. Lovely link there, yeah, and one much more difficult than that of the wanderer by the river. A rescue for which he felt himself helpless. And of course, Klesimer's commendation and promotion of Mira reminds us of his uncompromising judgment of Gwendolen when she had suggested she might make a career of it. Mira offers to teach Gwendolen, explaining to Gwendolen her relationship with Daniel as, oh, I was poor and needed help, I was in distress, I owe everything to him. And with this return to Gwendolen, George Eliot gives us a very long chapter. We have ample evidence of Grandcourt's control over her. She needs to accept that she wears a locked handcuff. He makes clear that no movement of Gwendolen in relation to Deronda escapes him. He likes his wife to be admired, but not in relation to Daniel. Daniel liked being near Gwendolen. This splendid, sad-hearted creature had turned to him with a beseeching, persistent need. And while he's out, Gwendolen visits Mira, and this is a very important encounter, and asks her if Daniel is quite good, no evil. And George Eliot asks directly, could the proud, spirited woman have behaved more like a child than she does here? She just wants contradiction of her husband's evaluation of Daniel. After this meeting with Mira, Gwendolen believes that Daniel is just a generous benefactor to Mira. Grandcourt believes that there is some confounded nonsense between Gwendolen and Daniel, not exactly flirtation. He wants her to know about his will, but he doesn't want to acknowledge his relationship with Lydia. He does want her to know that before he proposed to her, he knew that she knew about Lydia. He has no idea of Gwendolen's remorse. He does know about the idea of remorse, and I think that tells us a lot about him. because he assumes that she must simply be jealous of Lydia. This is the first point in the novel where Gwendolen does actually think about leaving her husband, but how could she go back to her family? He would compel her back. There was nothing she could allege against him, and separation from him would mean separation from Daniel. She goes to church. I think this is the only time that she does, although we're told she does in the book. But there's no spiritual dimension, and that, of course, is a very important distinction between her and, of course, her and Daniel and her and Mira. On their carriage coming back from church, they pass Lydia and her children. Grandcourt ignores them. Gwendolen wonders if she should reproach him. George Eliot tells us that it wasn't chance, but design that Lydia was there. And Gwendolen is shocked by Grandcourt ignoring her. At a Klezmer concert, Gwendolen sees Daniel, and she determines that she's going to compel him to do what she pleased, and she instructs him to visit her. Precise time, between 5 and 6. And if you remember, she kind of sets this up so that her husband's away, and Daniel comes, and she says, "Tell me what I can do." It is very, very straightforward to him, determined, and it's very dramatic because he starts to reply, and the door opened, and George Eliot says, "The husband entered," which is wonderfully phrased. It's like some big melodrama. And Deronda leaves, and the next morning at breakfast you have that wonderful shot, another good bit of dialogue actually, where he says, "I'm going yachting in the Mediterranean," and when, with a leap of hope, "I'm going the day after tomorrow," and Gwendolen says, "Shall I have Mama then to stay with me?" The new sudden possibility of peace and affection filling her mind like a burst of morning light. "No, you will go with me." End of the chapter, at that point. And Daniel is also going away. So Hugo has spoken to him about his parentage. He had been, in not saying anything before, he'd been obeying Daniel's mother's request, but now she wants to see him, and he gives Daniel a letter, and Daniel says, "Is my father still living?" So Hugo says no, and asks Daniel's forgiveness, and Daniel says the forgiveness has long been there. And we then have, in the mother and son, we have, of course, that meeting between Daniel and his mother. Incidentally, at the same point here, we are told about Mira experiencing fears that her father is looking for her. Daniel has his thoughts about his mother before he meets her. He'd long been secretly, he is thinking about her, and these thoughts have long been secretly present with him in the observation of all the women he had come near. Now, I am aware about time. Am I all right? Because I did start a bit late. All right, and I'll try and do this. Because of course he has two meetings with his mother. And the first one, when she first sees him, she says, "You are a beautiful creature," and she is very forthright. She tells him, "I was a great singer. I acted as well as I sang." Think about Gwendolen, Dan Bashan. "I did not want to marry, pressure her father. But crucially," she says, "I relieved you from the bondage of being a Jew." Daniel, "Then I am a Jew. My father was a Jew, and you are a Jewess." She gave him away to an Englishman who loved her. "I chose for you what I would have chosen for myself." And she admits that she's not like other women. "I did not feel that. I was glad to be freed from you. I gave you your father's fortune." A mother here admitting, willingly giving him away, wanting to be freed from him, but also believing she's done him good by freeing him from his Jewish background. And she tells him that he only can say, and only says he's glad he's a Jew because he hasn't been brought up as a Jew. I saved you from it. He struggles to understand her, but she is clear. You are not a woman. You may try, but you can never imagine what it is to have a man's force of genius in you and yet to suffer the slavery of being a girl. This is really important. This is a really important statement of strength from this woman. It challenges Daniel. Of course it does. This is his mother. Not at all what he would have thought it would have been meeting his mother. Challenges the reader too. Yeah? She says, to have a pattern cut out, this is the Jewish woman. This is what you must be. This is what you are wanted for. A woman's heart must be of such a size and no larger. Her happiness is to be made as cakes are, by a fixed receipt. That is what my father wanted. He wished I had been a son. He cared for me as a makeshift link. Daniel struggles, it's not surprising, he struggles. As her son was listening to her with feelings more and more highly mixed. The first sense of being repelled by the frank coldness which had replaced all his preconceptions of a mother's tender joy at the sight of him. But she doesn't soften. I didn't want you to be born. I parted with you willingly. No shame to have Jewish parents. The shame is to discuss it. Before she got married for the second time, she was baptized. She's got a husband, she's got 5 children, none of them know of your existence, and she's tired now, she'll see him tomorrow. Resolutely unsentimental. Before that, though, he has a long letter from Hans expressing his hope that the Jewess I prefer will prefer me. He writes about the sadness for Mira watching the slow death of her brother, and later in the chapter, Mira shares with Mrs. Mayrick that she's seen her father and knows that he has taken up gambling. She's not revealed Gwendolyn's visit to her, but it's made her acutely aware of how Daniel's world extends way beyond hers and includes Gwendolyn, who was increasingly repugnant to Mira. Through Hans knowing Rex, really tightly tied up, Anna has become part of the group, which brings Gwendolyn further into their realm. It was when Anna Gascoigne, visiting the Mayricks, was led to speak of her cousinship with Gwendolyn. The visit had been arranged that Anna might see Mira. The 3 girls were at home with their mother, and there was naturally a flux of talk among 6 feminine creatures, free from the presence of a distorting male standard. A brilliant endorsement and commendation of women together, yeah? And so Anna's perspective further fuels Mira's concern about Daniel and Gwendolyn, and this is a crucial section, I think, in which the women are being brought closer together around Daniel, in a sense. The second meeting between Daniel and his mother is more spirited. He states, you renounced me, you still banish me as a son, and she simply states, I am not a loving woman. That's kind of a subject, deal with it, yeah? He left an older man, we're told. Grandcourt's determination to have Gwendolyn with him on the yacht, yeah? It really is an embodiment of his determination to control her, to feel more securely that she is his, and the satisfaction he has in having his wife captive. Incidentally, here we do learn that Gwendolyn dreads, that's the word, becoming a mother, and she actually hopes for an accident, and she replaced some of Daniel's words in her mind. Turn your fear into a safeguard. Remember that they go to Genoa, and arriving in Genoa, they inadvertently but deeply symbolically join Daniel. Grandcourt is angry, he can't accept it's a mere accident, it's a disgusting fact. He feels they're in a conspiracy against him. He hires just a boat for 2 and they go out on it. She doesn't want to go initially, but she does, almost in despair. She gives in, perhaps we will be drowned. Daniel is sobbing. He sits doing nothing at all. He wanders outside by the sea, and he goes for a walk, crowds of people, someone's been drowned, and then we will have Gwendolyn talking to Daniel. Now, what I think is interesting about, we don't actually see, I mean, the dramatisation, we do see it, and that's interpreted, but we hear about it. She says there was a delay in throwing the rope, and his judgment is, it seemed almost certain that her murderous thought had had no outward effect, that quite apart from it, the death was inevitable. He held it likely that Gwendolyn's remorse aggravated her inward guilt, and he leaves her telling her she must rest now. And he assures her that no one else need know. She tells him about Lydia, you think I'm too wicked, and then there is a real sense here that she treats Daniel as her confessor. You must not forsake me, she says. Her desperation increases. She's pleading with him, but his view is that she is this stricken creature. And as we get into the last book, the opening invites us to stand back and reflect on the variable intensity of human experience. And in particular, reflect on the contrast we've seen in the year's experience, which had turned the brilliant, self-confident Gwendolyn of the archery meeting into the crushed, penitent, impelled to confess our unworthiness. We have that lovely phrase about, as we go back to the rectory to find out what's going on there, the quiet trotting of time at the rectory. Yeah? Back in Genoa, Sir Hugo has arrived. He's appalled at how Gwendolyn has been treated, but of course structurally in the will she's to become the kind of, she's to fulfill take the place of Lydia, exactly to live in the same place, kind of banished out there. There's a lovely, which appeals to me, having edited Macbeth, the fact that Sir Hugo says nothing in his life became him like the leaving it, he says of a grandcourt and so on. Hans, clutching the Times, thinks it's uncommonly lucky that Daniel being Genoa at this time of the accident, Gwendolyn able to remarry. He thinks, bingo, yeah, Daniel and Gwendolyn, whatever. And Mira is horrified at his language and castigates him. But she is not appeased. And back in her, I don't think we should ever underestimate the suffering for Mira of this, not just her seeing Gwendolyn and Daniel and that relationship, but the way lots of other people around her do. So when she's on her own, she felt no surprise when familiar sorrow, the capital S, personified sorrow, came back from brief absence and sat down with her. Daniel, with Gwendolyn, belonged to another world than her own. And then you get the whole business about Mira with her father. This is not done at all in the dramatisation. This is completely removed. I think it's important, I'm sure the details about it, but it's important to highlight the goodness and the familial love of his son and daughter. They are, George Eliot tells us, heroic children of an unworthy father. And it adds to the novel's exploration of parents, children, lost and found, avoiding sentimentality, balancing good and evil across Christian and Jew. He'd become an addictive gambler, which of course prompts us to think back to the beginning of the novel, Daniel's encounter with Gwendolyn and his concerns about gambling. Okay? Imagine the difference in Deronda when he comes back to England from when he left. He now dared avow to himself the hidden selection of his love, but he does have sustained concern for Gwendolyn, now intensifies because of her widowhood, but it is made clear that she prompts in him pity rather than personal love, and while he has a firm clarity, it's going to take the novel another 7 chapters and 70 pages to achieve the coming together which is clearly right. That incredibly moving scene when he goes to see the dying Mordecai and Mira and tells them, I went to learn my parentage, I am a Jew, but the claim that Gwendolyn has over Daniel haunts Mira. Back in Genoa, Gwendolyn is now being cared for by her mother, but she wants to see and consult Daniel. So Hugh actually does here think, oh yeah, well, now she's widowed, she could marry Daniel. He actually thinks about that there. Back in London, she summons Daniel. Again and again, she displays her insistence on his advice, his guidance, the importunate pleading, her dependence on him. He finds it incredibly difficult to break free. She gave no thought to the little Jewess and her brother. This essentially is the moment when Daniel performs the function of a selfless friend. Having heard an absolutely clear statement from Daniel that in regard to Gwendolen, I never had and never shall have the position of a lover, nor such feelings to any other woman, Hans tells Daniel that Mira is jealous of Gwendolen. Daniel's eagerness to confess his love could hardly have had a stronger stimulus than Hans, and Hans had given it in his assurance that Mira needed relief from jealousy. Daniel, in a tone of reverent adoration, asks Mira to promise to be his wife, and her response to his proposal, she sees it as the highest tribute man can give to woman. Her face glowed. He writes to Sir Hugo of his engagement. Sir Hugo is thoroughly vexed. His wife sees it as Daniel wasting his talents, going mad in this way about the Jews. Daniel's concern for Gwendolen is no treason to Mira, but it takes 3 visits to Gwendolen before he actually tells her he's a Jew and he's going away. She says, but you will come back. Explicitly, she could not spontaneously think of him as rightfully belonging to others more than to her. She is forsaken, but finally, she succeeded in saying brokenly, I said it should be better with me for having known you. And she tells her mother, I shall live, I mean to live, I shall live, I shall be better. We have the wedding of Daniel and Mira, humble wedding but splendid gifts. Something more precious than gold and gems came, a letter from Gwendolen. Do not think of me sorrowfully on your wedding day. I have remembered your words, that I may live to be one of the best of women who make others glad that they were born. I do not yet know how that can be, but you know better than I. If it ever comes true, it will be because you helped me. I only thought of myself, and I made you grieve. It hurts me now to think of your grief. You must not grieve any more for me. It is better. It shall be better with me, because I have known you. Mira and Daniel prepare to leave to the east. Mordecai is to go with them, but the novel ends with his death, with Mira and Deronda's arms around him. And this is unquestionably a fitting and powerfully moving conclusion to this magnificent novel, with Daniel Deronda firmly and rightly at its core. But to reshape Gwendolen's recognition, it is better, it shall be better with me because I have known you, let me state very firmly that it shall be better for Daniel because he has known the women he has encountered in this world before he sets out on his next journey. Thank you, and I'm sorry.
Flexible here.
Okay. Oh, that's
so
good.
Should we be?
Oh, well, that's good. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for that warm response.
Can we, you may have questions.
Yes, and I'm very happy.
You're going to be here for the whole day.
I am going to be here for the whole day. Yes.
When we've got more time this afternoon, we can come back to
absolutely.
It. Can I just say on your behalf, I mean, it's mind-blowing actually. You are such a wonderful teacher.
Oh,
because
you
took us by the hand.
Well, I hope not too much so, because I know that you are more experts here, and I hope I haven't insulted you at all by doing it in that way.
No. It's so illuminating that I feel each time I've heard you that I know Daniel Deronda so much better because I've been guided so skillfully by you as to the significance of all these little bits, and it's such a complex but fantastic novel, isn't it? And I felt so excited by wanting to go home and start again. Some of us here were with Pamela for for a whole day in Birmingham. Imagine the pleasure of that. Because we just went through, you know, book by book over the whole day, and it was a marvellous experience. Those of you who are there will, I'm sure, agree. And it's such a pleasure and a privilege for anybody who attends. I know Elaine and Joe are regular attenders. And what a privilege. It's just so wonderful that you have that enthusiasm which you convey. And that's what it's all about, isn't it?
I think that's what it's
fellowship's for.
It's not about teaching, it's about sharing.
It is.
And I look forward, I really do look forward to hearing the other papers and to talking to you all who know, you know, I'm sure that most of you know far more about George Eliot than I do. I mean, I am an enthusiast, but very much responding to the text. And incidentally, thank you for the accommodation of the study days. I do have some leaflets. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, yes, we'll have a break. We'll have a break.
But please do just approach me at any point. I'm very happy. Very good.
And then Laura and I can make sure that
if we think works.
And you mentioned Andrew Davis's adaptation. And you've all had your email editions of the newsletter, and some of you got paper. But we are showing those three episodes of Daniel Deronda in July. It's on your newsletter, but it will be.
And it's written.
Yeah.
It's written.
And
It's in 3 episodes, but the first one is a double length.
It is.
One,
Yeah.
that's right. And it's very.
But we are showing it, and it will be here. I think it's 3 Saturdays in July. But anyway, stretch your legs, coffee, and then we'll try to be back.